One of the most challenging things for many people is financial literacy, really understanding money, particularly young people, but also for older people as well. Today's guest is Billie Sinclair. Billie has a deep history and experience in teaching financial literacy. She comes from a background, believe it or not, of working in the futures commodity market, as well as for Merrill Lynch at one stage. She's passionate about helping people understand how to get out of debt, how to increase their financial literacy. She also works for a company called Legal Shield, and in that they offer, one of the things they offer is a very budget-friendly way to set up your will properly. You know, it's a subject most of us don't want to talk about. We don't think we're going to live forever. But it's important, especially as we age. I know you're going to love this story. You know, Billie is the daughter of Hungarian immigrants who came to Canada with nothing, and she has really carved a career for herself, as well as being a single mom to 3 kids. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Midlife Reimagined with the wonderful Billie Sinclair. Hi, Billie. Well, I love your story, and I've loved that we've connected so well here. Billie was one of the first people I met when I came to Vancouver. I actually reached out to you before we came. Billie has a Facebook group called the Vancouver Women in Business.
BC Women in Business.
BC Women in Business. And it's like, was there like, I don't know, 14,000 people or something? What is it now?
Almost 30, so
30,000.
29,000.
Oh, well done. You're the consummate networker. I love being part of that group too, because it's such a very supportive group, and you keep a tight rein on what goes into the group. So I want to talk really about your story, and I know you're passionate about financial literacy for families, and you teach this, you go into organizations and you teach this, but where did your passion come for this financial literacy?
You know, it's kind of a two-part story, Sally. So I myself was a single mom when my kids were 3, 5, and 7.5. I was not receiving any child support, and I ended up getting an opportunity to move into a brand new building that was for single moms only. But prior to that, I'd spent the previous 10 years working in the brokerage industry. So as a very young woman, I got exposed to commodity futures and all kinds of financial things that I never would have really ventured into on my own. I accidentally applied for a job at Merrill Lynch and got the job when I was 20.
That's interesting. So, okay, let's circle back here. How did you get a job at Merrill Lynch? Like, did you just decide I'm going to apply for this job?
No, I had no idea that I was applying for Merrill Lynch. I mean, honestly, it was back in the day. You just saw a little ad in the newspaper that said that they were looking for a trading assistant. And I'm like, well, I'm not sure what that is, but I can be an assistant to anybody. And it said that they wanted retail experience. And I had no idea what that was, other than that I had worked at Acme Novelty and I had worked at Woolworths. So these were 2 little department stores, and that's what I thought retail was. So I just applied for the job because I was looking, and I got an interview. And I guess I did well on all those tests, comprehension and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. But they did not hire me. They were looking for retail, which meant the stock market. And they said, sorry, they hired someone with a degree, which I didn't have. And then they got back to me a month or so later and said, are you still looking? And why are you still looking? And that was when they had an opportunity in their commodity futures division.
Wow.
So I didn't know what that was, but fortunately, that was also back in the days of on-the-job training.
Mm.
And I literally took over the gentleman's. So I had a boss, and I was able to take over his position in 6 months, and I just kind of ran with it. I just really loved commodity futures. I loved everything about it. And I was in Calgary at the time. And a few years in, my mother actually moved to Vancouver, and I came to visit her, and it was December, and it looked exactly like it looks right now. And I was like, what kind of place is this? Because I barely got my plane off the ground in Calgary to come here. There's fir, what are they, like little ferns growing on street corners.
Yeah.
So I immediately asked for a transfer, and the Vancouver office needed someone who had commodity futures experience. And so that's how I ended up here. So that was the start of of Billie Sinclair's financial life.
Can you just explain to me, and those who don't, what heck is commodity futures? What does that mean?
So commodity futures is definitely a very unique type of trading. So for example, you can imagine you are a cattle farmer.
Mm.
And so the cost of a pound of beef really affects your futures because, like every other business, you're trying to make decisions based on the future price that you'll be able to get when you sell your
Yeah.
goods. So futures came along and created more like a contract, almost like a stock, but it's not. It's a contract of, say, cattle. And then people literally became speculators. So the speculators actually help the people that are in the industry because the speculators kind of work with the price. Of course, they're buying and selling just like a stock market. And it gives the producers a little bit more leverage and it gives them a little bit more ability to plan for their future. So that's that's kind of how all got started. And like I said, I knew nothing about it and I just found it fascinating.
Yeah, it is. So you moved to Vancouver and you transferred. So then what happened?
I stayed in the financial. I stayed with Merrill Lynch. I worked actually for other companies in commodity futures. And then commodity futures actually started to decline kind of as an industry. And the Vancouver brokerage firms were not as thrilled about having futures divisions anymore. They ended up moving me into the retail stock market. So that's when I began to learn that side of the house, as you might call it. And learned all about stocks and bonds and derivatives and options and all those kinds of things. But I didn't like it. I really didn't like it very much. And I started to get into personal development. I started to take weekend workshops. And I just found that I was a little bit tired of helping the wealthy get wealthier. I actually did want to help regular people. And by that time, I was divorced and a single mom and living in single mom's housing. And they gave me an option to take a layoff. And I happily took it. And I found out that there was offered by the federal government these self-employment programs. And I'd always been curious about self-employment and interested in self-employment. And so that kind of added in the self-employment piece, although I didn't become self-employed particularly at that time. But I did get an opportunity to teach financial literacy full time. And so that's when I was able to take all the stuff that I'd learned over the years. It really matched nicely with the curriculum that I was asked to deliver. And I just absolutely loved that. And I did that for pretty much for the next 15 years. And then the next part of my story is when my brother died.
So all this time, before we move on to the change, you're a single mom with 3 kids. What was life like for you then? I mean, that must have been
Well,
challenging with you getting no child support.
the thing about living in single moms housing, I felt very supported. These are projects that exist today, and more of them have been built since those days. And they are a combination of the provincial government and the YWCA.
Okay.
So I was able to have really low rent,
Mm.
and that really helped during the time that I was in school. And then when I went back to work, of course, the rent was still affordable. And so life just generally was complex. 100 things I could tell you that happened, that were good and stressful. I ended up working for the Y in their single moms support services department. So I ended up hosting 2 single moms groups because I really, I just kind of rolled with it. It just kind of, things just worked out. I mean, my kids today, they have 1 child and 2 children, and they're like, oh my God, how did you do this with 3 children as a single mom? Because none of them are
Yeah.
single parents.
And that's just tough anyway, financially, but also just the balance of building a career. It sounds like you were building a career at the same time as the kid. Was your mum here at the time?
Yes, in fact, that's a great question. My mom was here,
Mm.
and she was very helpful in the babysitting department.
It's a
And
village. You can't do this
it's a
on you.
village.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
And
a
I
village.
didn't have any sisters, and my first brother died young, and my second brother would just live in his life. And so it was just really her and me kind of bouncing, the
Yeah.
jobs between us. I drove, she didn't. So she lived in Surrey, I lived in Vancouver. So there was a lot of coordinating. In fact, she died unexpectedly and suddenly one day as well when my kids were just young teenagers. Like I said, 100 things happened in that frame, as any one of us would have lots of stories to share. I'm sure you wrote a book, but it wasn't exactly Sally's life story. And I'm sure people say to you, you really should write Sally's life story one day. People say that to me all the time.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I love about when I get an opportunity to do an interview like this is the story behind who we are now, because that's fascinating. You could have, I mean, there's a whole lot of ways you could have ended up way different than what you are now, and you must have had it. I'm just trying to like a tenacity, a focus that you were just going to make this work.
Definitely. That's definitely in my personality.
Yeah, yeah. And you're also, I just want to do this little sidebar before we move on to how you get into what you're doing now, but you're the the child of an immigrants too. Your mum's Hungarian, is that correct? Yeah.
Yes, mom and dad were both Hungarian. Hungarian was my first language, and I started learning English just from the kids around me. And then my parents split up when I was 6. And by that
Mm.
time, I was going to school. My mom wanted to know English more too. There was no more Hungarian being spoken in the house. So I actually, over those early years, I lost my Hungarian. But I have a huge soft spot in my heart for every immigrant that wants to come here for an opportunity. They left during the Hungarian Revolution. They were plunked into northern Alberta with no English, no jobs, no, other than, of course, they had some support from the federal government. But, they also had to make their way in the world. So there's probably a little bit of that feisty kind of having to
It's
figure it out. And
Yeah, there's a whole different level of achievement and tenacity and just get on with it when you think about people arriving here with no language in northern Alberta. Just like how hard that would have been.
yeah,
Just but what they came from, they didn't want to stay, obviously, to give you and your brothers a better life. Really take my hat off to parents who do that. To leave family, to leave friends, to leave everything behind and start it, especially in northern Alberta, where it's been freezing in the winter time.
they didn't know what they were signing up for.
That's for sure. Okay, so let's go back forward. So you said there was a time where you kind of pivoted. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Sure. So I was very happily teaching financial literacy. I loved the agency I worked for and I loved my job. And my brother, 4 years younger than me, always lived kind of a high drama life. That was just him. And so he was going through some things. He married someone very quickly. The marriage was a disaster. It ended very quickly, and he was going through some real emotional upheaval. And one day he just stopped answering my text messages and my phone calls, and I was his sounding board, his support network. So I was pretty freaked out. Eventually, I had to send the police on a wellness check, and they found that he had taken his life.
Mm.
So the biggest effect, kind of like what that was able to do sort of in my community, was show all of us that not only life is precious and that tomorrow's not promised, but I had a lot of stuff to do in regards to, cleaning up things for his life and all, as well as just the trauma of this having happened and, how people that are close to someone who dies by suicide, they have to deal with those feelings of responsibility and could I have done more and could I have been there better? Like, did I miss some cues? All of that. But of course, then you have to like just get back into it and dive back into cleaning out his possessions and talking to the bank and talking to the CRA. And when I did that, the CRA told me he was 5 years behind in his tax filing. And
Mm.
was I willing to do that for him? Because he died without a will. I didn't have any rights per se, but they asked me to do this. So that wasn't hard for me. I sent in the 5 years of tax returns. And wouldn't you know, they gave him a $6,000 refund. And this became as a check payable to his estate, mailed to my house. And I was shocked, and I took this check to the bank and they're like, well, where's the will? And I'm like, oh, well, there isn't one. And I said, I'm his only family member. We have no siblings. We have no parents. He has no children, no wife. I'm it. And they're like, yeah, but that doesn't count for anything here. That $6,000, no one can have it. Well, except for us at the bank, we'll open an account. We'll take the money. We'll hold on to it for you. And I was like, well, what do people do in this situation? It must happen all the time. And they said, well, maybe go speak to a lawyer. And during this time, my staff and we were all facilitating these workshops on financial literacy, but wills and estates was not in our curriculum.
Mm.
And we realized we better add it. And so we went to the effort of adding a few pages on wills and estates and why it's important and what are the consequences of not having a will and all that. And so when I went to a lawyer, they asked me for a $5,000 retainer, and they wanted to charge me $300 an hour to help me petition the courts to give me access to my brother's affairs. And obviously that made no sense, because I said, well, why would I give you 5,000? What if you use 6,000, at $300 an hour? I don't know how many hours this project takes. So I said no, and just went back to work, left the money in the bank, and continued teaching and continued doing all the things that I do. And then it was in December of that year. So he died in May. And in December of that year, I'm big on the networking circuit. So I was at a networking event, and this is when I learned about Legal Shield. And of course, I had a bit of an eye for legal now, which I might not have had at another time in my life. And I said, what do you do and how do you do it? And that was what caused the next pivot, which was I got very passionate about helping women and families and small business owners get access to affordable legal advice, including a focus on wills and estates.
I know you're really passionate about that. You and I have spoken about that before. And I know the challenges. When my dad passed in 2022, was in fact the time, he'd made a small change to his will without getting it notarized. And we had to go through a whole process. All he did was change my sister's names back to their maiden names. They were all divorced and they'd all done that. But he just notarized on his will without a. And so it was just that one small little issue meant that we had to get, letters from his doctor to say he was of sound mind and body when he did that. And my uncle was the, they call it executor. So he had to go to the court, and all just over something really small that Dad thought he was doing, because he ticked all the boxes. My father was, like everything was locked up, but just that small little thing. If you don't have the wherewithal, he just thought he was doing the right thing. It can be so complicated, can't it? Just little things when it comes to working out estates.
Yeah, and I really appreciate your experience and your story, because so many people, like I said, I had a will, but I never thought about whether or not my brother had one. Never even crossed my mind. I'm older than him. Like these things just don't cross your mind.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to have learned how important it is, on the front lines. I'm an advocacy oriented person and a teacher at heart. So it's like literally, if I learn anything, I can't wait to share it with somebody else.
Yeah.
Just in my nature. So to have these experiences, as you shared, where people don't realize, they just don't know what they don't know.
Exactly.
And I felt very offended, actually, that how much I did know, and yet why didn't I know this? So how is this information not just regular falling out of bed stuff that you should learn as part of adulting? And then I bump up against so many people that have all these misconceptions. It makes sometimes having a Facebook group a little bit frustrating, because of course I want to run my group in the most kindest, with some strength, behind it way. But people will post comments that are inaccurate, and they're just all part of this idea that, well, it's just this, or it's just that, or this isn't important, or that. People make just stuff up out of their heads, or from what they might have heard somewhere along the way, and it's been, evolved in their minds since they heard it. And so I'm really all about people getting the right information at the right time, and coming from a background of financial literacy. And I'm not talking about poverty per se, but using your money wisely. Then when I can also share on top of all that knowledge, a way to get these things done in an affordable manner, it was just the cherry on the cake. It just was like, well, this is an absolute no-brainer.
So let me ask you, if somebody doesn't have a will, what happens here? We'll talk specifically about Canada. I'm not sure whether it's like in every other country, but specifically in Canada, I'll get onto the wills through Legal Shield in a minute, but what happens if you don't have a will here and something happens to you?
Well, you can kind of use my brother's example. So some aspects the family can find out about. For example, I called the bank. I had no rights per se, but they told me, you know what, your brother doesn't have any money in his account. I was like, okay, good. I'm glad they answered that question for me. When I went to his landlord, obviously I went to his landlord right away. The police had broken down the door. It was a disaster. I didn't have any right to my brother's possessions or anything like that. But the landlord wanted my help. He wanted the apartment available for the, a future tenant. Rent was paid, but, he didn't have to let me in there, but it was in his best interest to do that. So there's another area where you don't have any rights.
Yeah.
When my girlfriend died a few years ago without a will, I knew, because we're friends, that she had a car loan. It was actually her family that came out from Ontario, and we all went through her papers and everything in her apartment and found the car loan document. And I called the loan. This happened. Your client has passed away. We have your car. We don't want it. We have no rights to it, because we couldn't have done anything with that car. We weren't even legally allowed to drive it from the underground parking to the street, but we did. And I told them, your car, if you don't come soon, because they were dilly-dallying about it, and the rent was only paid till the 1st or till the 30th, right? So I said, if you don't come and get this car, you're going to find it's going to be on the street with the doors unlocked, with the keys in the glove box. And so, you don't have any rights to anything other than if you just get lucky, like I did with the bank, and they told me that there was no money in the account. I bet you if there was money in the account, they wouldn't have told me that.
No, they would have pulled the privacy thing.
Yeah, so you know nothing. You can't get anywhere. I also had a girlfriend whose baby's father died. They were not together. And this baby was now a teenager who could drive. But this teenager had a hard time getting access to his father's car because there was no will. What's ICBC going to do? Just let you take this car just on your word? Nothing can happen. And so then what happens is people do have to go to lawyers, and they do have to pay $400 an hour, because $300 was 15 years ago.
Yeah.
400 is kind of like the going rate.
From what you're telling me, Billie, it's selfish not to have one, to not have a will. It's because the mess you leave behind for your family is extraordinary.
As a facilitator of thousands of students, I'm really careful to never come off in a judgmental way. There are people that don't care about their family. They don't care what happens after they're gone. They're like, you know what? Figure it out. I'm out of here. Don't just do whatever you got to do. I don't care. That's your option. But if you care and if you love your people, of course, why wouldn't you take care of this? Because there is, and I always say this in my workshops, that tomorrow is not promised. I want you to be here for 10, 20, 30, 40 more years. And who doesn't? Because tomorrow's not promised. And I've seen it in my own life. I could just go through my friends list, Sally, and tell you how many of my friends have passed away since they became friends of mine on Facebook. Some I've been involved in, some I have not. Yeah. And so if you care, it's really imperative that you just, buck up. Get this down on paper. It's no one's favorite topic, I always say.
I was going to say that it's almost like if I do it, I have to face the fact of my own mortality, and people don't want to do that. We don't want to do it. But, I absolutely understand what you're saying, because just that one small thing with Dad was just a whole heap of stress. Not so much for me, because I don't, my sisters live in a different state in Australia. It was up to my two sisters. It was an enormous amount of work for them and the executor of the will. And, I think we often used to say, God, Dad would be turning over his grave if he knew we were going through this, because he was so particular about all this and doing all the right things. But, he used to go and have a drink on a Sunday night with what we call the RSL, which is like your Legion. And we often said, somebody's told him, just change the names and you'll be fine, Cal. And it wasn't the right thing to do. You get people, older people in particular, I think, tend to listen to their peers about what they've done. But I really understand what you're talking about, because as you're talking, I'm thinking, wow, the mess that's left behind, and it's an absolute quagmire of legality, and that just a small thing you can do to ensure that your family doesn't have to go through this. I think that's a great legacy to leave for people.
I will add one caveat just so that people don't have the wrong idea. A will is not a panacea of everything now goes easy. A will is just a starting point for the family. It's still, I have books on it, families and the money, and all of a sudden conflicts, and it's not necessarily everything now goes smoothly.
Yeah. You'd like to think your family isn't going to fight. You can't guarantee. I mean, we were lucky. Our family, we were just like, whatever happened. It was just everything was kind of split just 5 ways. And it was like, whatever, But I can, I've heard of other families where there is conflict, and that's challenging. Do you
Yeah.
do things in the will, like I was thinking the other day, passwords? Like, does it?
No, no,
No?
that's not part of the will.
Right.
But you might have seen me posting over December that I like to gift my members with what's called an end of life planner. The
Mm.
planner is where you put those kinds of things to your loved ones, instructions that were not in the will. The will is really just the legal stuff. Who gets what? Where is it all? What is it all? Why did I make this decision? Because in all fairness, it's our resources and our children don't actually have legal rights to anything they want. Like we
Mm.
still get to decide.
Mm.
So I sometimes share that, let's just say one of your kids needed money for a down payment and you gave them that, but you didn't give any to the other kids. So you
Yeah.
might not want it to be divided equally upon
Yeah.
your death because that child already got some.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if that child decides, for whatever their personal reasons are, to challenge the will and say, well, that was then and this is now, and I want my 1/5, that can be done. So then the other children will not get their inheritance right away because now it's going into court. So a will doesn't guarantee no trouble, but I also call it a deterrent because you kind of have to have deep pockets to take a will to court and challenge it. And if you don't have deep pockets, you might just go, well, I'll just be mad at Bob forever, but at least I'll get my share.
Fair enough too. That's fair enough too. So, thinking back, that's what Dad had that in his will. Anybody he'd lent money to, all debts were cancelled, which was really interesting because he kind of had helped a lot of not the private family, but his siblings out along the way. What do you find is people's I suppose in teaching financial literacy, when you go into Billy goes into organizations and teaches financial literacy, what do you think are some of the big misconceptions? And I want to talk about, kind of younger people in particular, say 20s up until their mid-30s. What do you think are the biggest misconceptions they have about financial literacy?
Well, that's a great topic, and two things really come to mind for me, and they're connected, and that is consumerism and debt.
Mm.
So it seems just because of the bombardment of messages on a moment by moment basis, the use of their capital is really suspect. And it's complicated. I'm not mad at anybody. It's getting more and more expensive, and wages do not keep up with the cost of living. So I get it. But once they use up their debit card of the amount of money in the checking account, of course, everything then switches to their credit card.
Mm-hmm.
And that takes us to the second subject, which is the increase in credit card balances. So they don't understand the consumerism, and they aren't encouraged to be a conscious consumer. And they are encouraged to spend a lot and buy the latest iPhone, whether they need it or not. And then they are also encouraged constantly by the providers of debt to use their debt for all those things, and then to take all the increases. And so I end up helping a lot of people that, we're all a little bit delusional, and we think everything is just temporary, and I'll only do this for a little while, and a little while turns out to be 16 months, and then your credit cards are maxed out. And then what? So those are the two things that really go hand in hand. And I'm not mad at anybody. Like I said, they might have had a job loss. They might have had an illness. They might have had a divorce. Messes with the income side, causes a lot of stress on the purchasing side. And then they end up using debt to survive. And it's just it's a love-hate relationship, but it's a super shady industry. Credit industry is just so shady. They don't tell you anything. Like you almost have to rip your statement apart to even find out what interest you pay on this debt.
Yeah.
Even just to see what is the date of my payment due. It's not easy. And they've never made it easy, but they're making it harder and harder and harder.
Yeah.
And because we never touch money anymore, the odd person spends cash, but it's very rare. It doesn't feel like you're spending when you tap a credit card.
Absolutely.
So
We sat down,
nobody's
so I was going to say, we sat and did a budget with my daughter one day a couple of years ago, and she figured out she was spending, what was it, $70 a month on coffee. I didn't, because all she did was this. Every time she'd go in, it was this, and then she'd add, I don't know, something extra on top of the coffee. And you were right, because we talked about, aging myself. We used to get money on every Thursday in a little brown thing was written down, your tax you'd paid, and all that stuff. And then you'd go to the bank, which if you didn't get, I know, I don't know if it was like that in Canada, but here in Australia, 3 o'clock, the bank closed on a Friday.
Yeah.
So you had to get to the bank to deposit your cash, otherwise carry it around all weekend. Terrible. Then if you wanted money, you had to go back into the bank and actually get that money out in cash. And I think that you're right in that because we tap, it's like it's not real. And
yeah, when I saw the very first ads about the tap, Interact was a big thing. It was just like there's two things that really got me over the last decade or so. That was the first one. That was probably more like 15 years ago. I was like, oh, great. Game over for people that are trying to manage their money.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, every time you tap, it's actually going to cost you money.
Well, yes, there's also that. So people don't know how many transactions, and unlimited transactions, that could be a $30 a month fee just for the unlimited. I've had people try every which way. Well, I'll have 5 different accounts, then I can manage my money. And then they forget that they're paying fees on 5 accounts.
Yes.
I'm like, people really do try. I get it. They really do try.
Yeah.
And I don't mean all people try. Some people try. But we are all up against this incredible machine that is quite against us. And I'll just share another really simple analogy that I use in class, which has to do with the dollar store. So the dollar store sounds like it's so cheap. Now, there are some dollar stores that have more expensive stuff, but the general dollar store where things are $1 or $2 and you just kind of look at them and they look cute, and we love shopping. Who doesn't love shopping? Everybody loves it. And we want to do it. It makes us feel like we're participating, we're not just struggling. We get to enjoy our money. So you throw all this stuff into the cart and it all looks important in the moment. But when you get to the till and it's $29, you just accept it. But if it was called the $29 store,
yeah,
you'd
that's
say,
right.
You know what? Yeah, no, I'm okay. I'm good. I don't want to spend $29 today.
That's exactly true. Yep.
And a lot of my classes, once we kind of break down this and people feel offended by the dollar store and they realize that they've been using it sort of like for entertainment, and they say, you know what, from now on, I'm going to put this money in the can under the cupboard instead. And then they come back to class and they're excited that they've got like $100 in their can, which they never had in a can before. It's just all about consciousness, conscious spending, making conscious decisions. Women have, like I said, I could also tell you 100 stories on this topic too. Like if you're in the mall and you see the sidewalk sale and it says $10 in big letters, you can't even avoid it. Like your body just is magnetized.
That's right.
To that $10 rack. And you hope you can find something. And you just hope.
That's right. So true.
You take home stuff that you don't really love it, but it was $10. So how could you? You might have got 3 of them. And then next year you're going through your closet because it's too crowded, and you end up pulling out things that you don't love and you give them to the Salvation Army or the local thrift store.
Yeah.
Which is great for them, but they still have tags on them. Like you literally never wore them.
So say to my kids, my favorite 4-letter word is sale, S-A-L-E, like straight to the sale. But you're right, and because that thing now, buy one, get one half price. Were you going to buy 2 pairs of shoes? Or did you just want one? But yeah, that kind of thing. Oh, I get a second pair for half. But were you did you want 2 pairs? And it's all, I don't like to use the word manipulation, but it is manipulation and marketing. I mean, I studied marketing when I was doing my MBA. And that's what you do. I mean, you just go after the kind of that common denominator that people get excited about. I love how you really frame this though. I'm going, yeah, I get it. Like the $2 store, or we called it the $2 store in Australia, but the dollar store. It is. You go in there and go, oh, I'll have that. Oh, well, that looks good. Oh, it's $1. Yeah, $30 when you get to. It's like I wasn't going to spend $30. I was going to come in for one thing, and it's all designed for our consumerism. One of the things when we moved to Canada, we got rid of so much stuff. We ended up giving most of our things away to charity, furniture, because we just didn't want to go to the Facebook market theme of trying to negotiate down. And it was one of the greatest feelings in the world to give a lot of our furniture to a charity that set up homes for mums who were escaping domestic violence, and it just felt so good. But one of the things I decided when we came here, I'm not buying stuff to clutter, because the more cupboards you have, more stuff you put in them, and being very minimalistic now about what we have, because doing a big move like that, you realize how much money you spend on stuff. For the moment will look pretty. Like my cushions look really lovely this year. They're beautiful green. Oh, next year I want blue. What am I going to do with those lime ones? They're green ones. And we all like nice things around us. But when you start to think of the consumerism that's involved and how much money you spend, it just really makes you stop and think about where we've gone, and to watch, as you were saying before, the new whatever phone comes out and suddenly everybody has had that. It really impacts. And I think a lot of people, younger people now, with their enormous mortgages, like just, it wasn't like that when we were buying our first house. I think we paid 137,000 for it. But it was hard. It was just as hard, let's face it, But it just seems now there's a different view of what we think we have to have in order to have that model of success.
Yeah, that's the same with vehicles. Vehicles are, and I'm, having been coaching and teaching for all these years, I've had many people in my office that were spending $800 on a vehicle 10, 15 years ago. I helped this one couple where he was really attached to his Hummer. He was never able to manage financially from month to month, and he'd be borrowing from his next pay and irritating his boss that, again, you're going to have an advance again. And until his girlfriend introduced me to me, he really wasn't very amenable, to these ideas of being careful, because there's also an ego aspect to it. So that's why it's so complicated. I still use an iPhone 13 mini. It works great. And I've received every email of every update, 14, 15, 16, and now 17. But even some of that is, you use the word manipulation. I got an email that said I could upgrade for $1 a month. Well, that sounded pretty interesting until I went in, and it wasn't just $1 a month. It was $31 a month, and the $30 went to nothing that I needed. And the guy kept saying to me, well, when you're traveling internationally, then you can make your calls for free. And I'm like, sir, I don't travel internationally.
Yeah.
So this $30 is buying me something I don't need. How does that make any sense? Just so I can use this $1 towards my phone, which is obviously going to pay off nothing in the first year or two. So I get it. The marketing part is complicated. I market a service, but I really want people to recognize when marketing comes with ethics. If you're making jewelry, if you're making earrings and you're selling them on English Bay, I want you to sell your earrings. I do. I want you to succeed. And if you're selling them for $39, you're probably just not going to get too many people unless you can really prove why they're worth $39. So, it's such a complicated world in which we live. And so that's why I have so much empathy for people that are not really managing financially, because, they're just bombarded in every area, and supported very little.
I love your passion about this. I love how focused you are and clear you are on what this means to people and the way you present. The fact that you've had this extraordinary experience in futures trading and stock market, like you've seen the highs and the lows, you've seen the making people rich. I just think that brings to what you do some real depth of understanding what people are going through, especially being a single mom and surviving. I want to ask you a little bit. Let's go back to that 30-year-old Billie. If you could tell yourself one thing, what would you tell her? What would you tell that young woman who was, three little kids and trying to make it on your own, and now seeing what you're doing? What would you tell her?
There's a side of me that wants to tell her to be more careful with her money, because I certainly wasn't super careful in my days. And my kids will tell you today that they appreciate that I don't have anything to leave them. Like, I didn't have a big nest egg, and instead I gave them what they needed at the time, instead of making them wait and saying, no, this is going to be going into your legacy, So there's a side of me that wants to say, be more careful with your money decisions. But there's another side of me that is more towards that you will figure it out. Everything You just have to you have to kind of try and read between the lines at all times. So it comes back to this conscious decision making. I came up in a very poor family. So getting into Merrill Lynch, it was just like night and day, holy.
Bit.
And I once took my mother dress shopping because I had a Reitman's card. And so this was how I was going to buy her something. And she tried on a few dresses, and she was a very frugal, practical woman. And so I was very much against that. Just wanted to see what it felt like to be wealthy. And when we went to the till to pay for the dress that she had chosen, my credit card declined. I've never forgotten that. I was maybe 16 years old. She
Oh,
was mortified. My
yes.
mother is the kind of person that if her car, no, she never drove, but if her car had have died in an intersection, she would have died of embarrassment. She would have left that car in the intersection and walked away down the street pretending it wasn't hers. She was
Yeah.
extremely sensitive about those kind of things.
Yeah.
So it's some of those bad experiences that cause you to go, oh, I never want to do that one again. So
Yeah.
we do have to have some bad experiences.
Oh, yes.
When I was breaking up with my children's father, they are a wealthy family. So we had kind of been insulated from kind of real life for the 10 years that we were together and I was having children because he kind of came from a wealthy family. But when we broke up, that was it. I was like cut off, right? So then again, you really have to go, okay, how are we going to make this work? What are we going to do? What stops am I going to have to pull out? And so life kind of gives you your lessons along the way, whether you want them or not. So the sooner you learn how to have good practices and how to, like my guy will say, like, I have a budget. I'm very clear when all the bills are due. I'm very good with all of those things that a lot of people just don't think it's important. But I learned kind of the hard way that managing these things, especially when you're self-employed. So I became self-employed, in over the years. And then you don't know what your income's going to be. So it's not like you can plan your paycheck. Then you have to, hopefully before then you've developed some practical skills of planning. And I call it like with the groceries, for example, when you start to get low on the mayonnaise, you should put mayo on the grocery list. You don't want to be looking for the mayo and realize that you don't have any and you really needed it. So there's this planning piece, so my 30-year-old self, and I think I did do some of that, is to become a planner, to be more consciously aware of these things, because if it wasn't taught to you in your home, then it's up to you to then go and learn it and figure it out.
Yeah. I mean, those are great pieces of wisdom amongst what you're going to tell your 30-year-old. I think that's especially now, as food prices continue to go up, rents seem to be leveling out a little bit. They're still extremely high here in Vancouver, as they are in most capital cities. But I'm going to put in the show notes how people can reach out to you, Billie. I think if anything has come out of this interview is get your will done. Get that done. Don't even think of it. And Billie can help you do that. She can help you navigate that without the big legal fee. That really, I think for many, just is probably a little bit of a deterrent even to get it done. So if you've got a way to do that, that's fantastic.
Well, thanks for mentioning that. That is actually high on the list of reasons why people put it off. I paid $800 to get a will done 20 years ago. That's a lot of money back then, but I thought it was important. I was a single mom with kids. Today, it's probably about that or more,
Yeah.
1,500 maybe.
Yeah.
And so it is a deterrent, and people do put it on their list. They mean well. It's just they never quite figure out how to come up off of $1,500 to get it done.
Yeah.
And so with Legal Shield offering it as one of the benefits of being a subscriber, which is about $50 a month, it
Wow.
just completely removes that barrier. And that's one of the things that got me so passionate about it right from day one. I was like,
Yeah.
really? How could I not know about this? And now that I know about it, how can I not share it?
Yeah. I love that. I like it. That's the type of person you are anyway. I know you like that. You're a very generous of spirit. Billie, this has been wonderful. And again, reach out to Billie. The details for how you get hold of her And for 2026, make that a thing. Get your finances in order. I think I remember a cousin of mine used to say, her dad used to say, take care of your pennies and your pounds will take care of themselves. It's the little things that we can do. And with Billie's guidance, and especially if you're in an organization, you're looking for somebody to introduce financial literacy to your staff. She does some great workshops. So Billie, thank you. It's been such a pleasure talking to you, learning more about your story. And I look forward to contacting you about Legal Shields. We'll do that next week.
Awesome. And thank you too, Sally. It's obviously, I just think you're such a gem. There was definitely, we gained by you guys moving here. And
so much.
Very much appreciate the opportunity to share
You're
this
welcome.
with you.
I turn on the artificial sunlight. So one thing I miss.
Well, you're going to get a little bit today. The sun's out today.
See blue sky outside. Yay. It's only 3 degrees, but that's okay. All right. Thanks, Billie. It's been great talking to you. We'll chat soon.
You too, Sally. Bye for now.
Well, I hope you feel inspired to really begin your own journey into financial literacy for yourself. To contact Billie, all her details are below in the show notes. And she's really passionate. I know she's helped me a lot since we came to Vancouver, and she's a wonderful friend to have. I look forward to bringing the next episode of the Midlife Reimagined podcast to you. And remember to subscribe so you do not miss an episode. Until then, I'll see you soon.